It's Muppeturgy with a very special episode about the Ruth Buzzi episode of The Muppet Show. Welcome back to Muppeturgy. We're so glad you're here with us. I'm David Levy. We also have
Adam Grossworth,
Christy Bauer,
Michal Richardson.
And we also have an annoying amount of business this week, so please bear with me.
The bear can barely bear it, folks.
It's just been a while since we actually recorded anything, so we've just got a bunch of these. Hopefully this is our last disclaimer about episode order, but we recorded a bunch of episodes in advance, and we made some guesses about which order Disney Plus would use, and then Disney Plus put up the show, and it was in the New York airing order, so we were right. And then a week later, they changed it for some reason back to the production order, which after watching a few in the air order, I think is a bummer. We'll get into that, I'm sure, as we go along about, what things make sense when you're watching. None of this really matters because it's streaming and you can easily watch them in whatever order you want. And you probably aren't watching them one a week like we are anyway, but we're nerds and we need an organizing principle. So we're following their lead and we're still recording in advance. So we did one episode before they changed the order that you will hear in a few weeks. But now we're on track for real, and that, I hope, is the last time I will talk about our episode order.
The question is, who cares?
And I just want to shout out that the Muppet Wiki has a great page with the list of episodes that you can order by production order or New York order or UK order. And they recently added a randomizer button if you just are like, hey, I want to watch the Muppets, I don't know what to watch. And that's a good way to break up the monotony. Not to say that there's monotony, but, You'll hear why I might be recommending that.
Speaking of which, I guess in the Juliet Prowse episode, I said that I thought it was weird to listen to us without watching along, and I want to apologize to any listeners who are doing that, because some of you are, and we're very glad you're here, and we respect your process and your journey. We obviously think the Muppet Show is delightful, and hope you are enjoying it or have enjoyed it in the past. And in fact, as you will hear tonight, you may want to use us as a guide for which episodes to maybe skip sometimes. So however you're doing it, we think you're doing great.
Oh, Droop, you're here too.
I didn't think you'd notice.
It has been a while now, as I said, but in conjunction with the Disney Plus release, Rita Moreno has done a bunch of delightful press. I don't know why it's all her, but I'm not complaining. So we'll have all of this in the show notes for this episode. But Vulture put up a list of their 25 essential episodes, which is a pretty good list. And it includes a quote from Ms. Moreno about the opening dance number. So first, a correction. We called it a tango. It's actually an Apache. The music is tango. The dance is an Apache, which is a usually comedic dance fight, which it was. And she also says in that quote that it was her idea to do it, which somewhat answers our question about guest stars being involved in the writing of the show. It seems like they were at least a little. There's also an interview that she did with The New Yorker, which we'll also link to, which doesn't exactly say, but it heavily implies that on Fever, she sang live, but the bass and drums were recorded, which was also a question that we had in the Rita Moreno episode. So that clarifies that.
Yeah, my kind of woman!
In last week's Joel Grey episode, we said that it was the first appearance of Wayne and Wanda. It was not. They are in the Connie Stevens episode, but the Joel Grey episode is their first on-stage appearance.
Aha. And last but not least, I want to thank our friends on the Extra Hot Great podcast for giving us a shout out a couple weeks ago. And welcome to any crossover listeners. Speaking of crossovers, the week that this episode drops, I will be a guest on Extra Hot Great for Muppet Thunderdome. We're going to determine which Muppets would win in a series of battles to the death. They did this with Smurfs on their Patreon a few weeks back, and it was completely deranged, and I can't wait. So that will be on Extra Hot Great on March 24th, if you want to hear me kill some Muppets.
Am I laying it on a little too sick?
If Muppets are battling each other to the death, and is the last surviving Muppet the one who eats all the other Muppets who have eaten all the preceding Muppets? Is that how it works?
It's a great question, and we'll find out. When they did it with Smurfs, there were implements involved, and but they're Smurfs; they work differently. So yeah, I think who can eat who is probably going to be a really solid determining factor. Listen and see. I mean, we haven't recorded it. We haven't recorded it yet, so we'll find out. Okay, that was a lot. So I will just say that right now we are talking about the 4th episode of The Muppet Show made, and actually also the 4th episode of The Muppet Show aired in New York, which so far is unusual for them to be the same. This is the Ruth Buzzi episode. It aired on October 11th, 1976 in New York. David, please tell us about Ruth Buzzi.
To introduce our guest star, that's what I'm here to do. So it really
really makes me happy to introduce to you.
So it's been really interesting as I've been talking to people about The Muppet Show that Ruth Buzzi seems to be someone who is really a generational marker, in that people who are a little bit older than me remember her really fondly, mostly from Laugh-In, where she was regular for the entire run of the show. She won a Golden Globe for it. She had 5 Emmy nominations for it. She had a signature character named Gladys Ormsby, who a lot of people remember mostly because she liked to hit celebrities with her purse. People a little bit younger than me remember her as Ruthie from Sesame Street. She was a regular on the show from 1993 when they had that Around the Corner expansion. And she stayed on the show even after they discontinued the Around the Corner, both as Ruthie, her character, and as the voice of the animated Susie Kabloozy and her pet cat, Fef, all the way through 2008. I think the four of us all fall right in the middle of the generations who didn't really firsthand experience either of that. So she's a little bit of a mystery to us. Like many of the guests, I think, who were on, especially season 1 of The Muppet Show, she made a ton of guest star appearances throughout her career on variety shows, on sitcoms. She was a recurring character on That Girl. She was a regular roaster on the Dean Martin roasts. She did have a one-season TV show where she starred alongside next week's guest star, Jim Nabors, as time-traveling androids Fee and Fum in The Lost Saucer, which was a Sid and Marty Krofft show. But primarily, she's a comedian. You know, she got her start in stand-up. She was teamed with Dom DeLuise for a while, and she's still around. She's on Twitter at Ruth_A_Buzzi. She currently lives in Texas on a 600-acre cattle and horse ranch with her husband, where they collect cars. And I would just like to say that if you watch this episode and come away thinking like, ugh, Ruth Buzzi, please don't blame her for it. She's much funnier and more entertaining than this episode might imply. We're really just psyching everyone up with our intros today.
Nobody's turned us off yet.
Well, it is. It's just on the Buzzy tip, and I mean, this will come up. This will come up next week for me, at least, and I think with Sandy Duncan and some others. I'm slightly older than David. I have never seen an episode of Laugh-In. I mean, I've seen clips, right? Like every time there's like a montage on the Emmys, there's a clip of Laugh-In. But like, I knew who Ruth Buzzi was as a child. Like, Ruth Buzzi was famous. Like the monoculture in the 70s and 80s existed in a way that it doesn't now, right? And so I don't know that I knew who Ruth Buzzi was. I'm not sure until just now when you explained it. I still knew who Ruth Buzzi was, but like, I knew the name Ruth Buzzi, and if you showed me a picture of Gladys, I would be like, that's Ruth Buzzi, without knowing why. And the same is definitely true for me of Jim Nabors. And I just find that interesting. And I don't know, maybe it's not, but like just in how the culture has changed, that you could have somebody who was famous in that way. And something, when we were researching the episode, we'll have a couple clips in the show notes of her doing Gladys. Like, she did Gladys everywhere. That was a laughing character who she would do on other talk shows. And I remember like Gilda Radner and Lily Tomlin would like also do their characters in other places, not just on like their actual shows. So it's not crazy to think that she would be a good early guest in the Muppet Show. She just wasn't.
She was in the running to be the first guest. She, alongside Julia Prowse and Connie Stevens, was one of the people that basically did this as a favor to Bernie Brillstein, who was Jim's manager, who called in favors to get people to be guest stars on this show that did not yet exist, that no one was really sure what it was going to be. So she brings the variety show expertise from Laugh-In, and also she was doing a favor and putting a lot of trust in these not entirely proven people putting on this new show.
Why don't you get me started? I feel like we've given this away, but Christy, what did you think overall of this episode?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned the four of us kind of falling in that vacuum between Ruth Buzzi's poles of notoriety. And I actually have seen quite a bit of Laugh-In because I was very much a Nick at Night kid. And there was a year or two there in the early 90s where they played a lot of Laugh-In. So I've seen a lot of Laugh-In. But because I saw it when I was very young, in my mind, the only character that I've ever seen Ruth Buzzi play is that Gladys character. So it was really strange to me to see her put in an episode where they didn't have her do anything that was particularly character acting. And I think it's to the episode's detriment. Like, it's a very weird, diffuse, sloppy episode. And, the whole conceit of the show is that it's sort of this shambolic atmosphere, but this feels actually shambolic to me.
I'm going to echo everything that Christy said, and I have some more specific thoughts about the writing and the writing for Ruth Buzzi in particular, but I'm going to hold on to that until we get to the shout out of a canon segment in a little bit. Short version, I'm mad about this episode. I have a lot of reasons. We'll talk about them.
All right. Well, let's keep our audience waiting and talk about some songs first.
So yeah, this episode has a few songs in it. The first song is my favorite thing in this entire episode. It's another straightforward Electric Mayhem number. They do the song Sunny.
Thank you for the love you brought my way. You gave to me your all in all. Now I feel 10 feet tall. Oh, Sunny, one so true. I love you. Bastard! Sonny. Thank you for the review. Let me see. What's going on? Sonny. Oh, what's going to happen? Thank you for the review.
Yeah, so the joke of it is that Animal is constantly insisting that they go faster and until they get overwhelmed, and it's very funny. The song itself is from 1963. It was written by a Nashville musician named Bobby Hebb, who was very entrenched both in the R&B and country worlds in the mid-20th century. He recorded the most well-known version of it, which was a number 2 hit in August 1966, and it led to him opening for the Beatles during a period where his song was actually charting higher than anything of theirs at that point, which I thought was interesting. And it's a song that he wrote after his older brother was murdered the day after the JFK assassination, which I just found bizarre and interesting. And according to BMI, it's the 25th most played song on the radio of all songs in the 20th century. There's this weird list, and I'm obsessed with it because none of the songs seem like the songs that you'd be like, oh yeah, that's the song that was played more than any song in the 20th century. Yeah, number 25. And it was actually not first recorded by Bobby Hebb. It was the very first recording was done by Miko Hirota, who was the Connie Francis of Japan.
Not to be confused with the Connie Stevens of Japan.
Who I believe is Connie Stevens.
Yeah, she's big in Japan, right?
She would certainly tell you so.
Yes. But yeah, the puppetry in this particular segment, I always love the puppetry in all of the Electric Mayhem segments, but there's this point where the camera pulls out and sort of pans around the band, and like Dr. Teeth looks over and sort of like arches an eyebrow, and it's just it just feels real. Like there's a sort of like, an added element of connection there that
I think I made a gif of that moment and we didn't talk about it. Like I was struck by it too. And there's very early on, there's a side view of Animal, which I feel is something we don't see a lot. And it really looks like he's playing the drums. Like I understand that he's not. I know he can't be, but it's so good.
I couldn't take my eyes off of that shot because we see the stool that Animal's sitting on, which we haven't seen before and I think very rarely do see. And it's not the kind of stool a real drummer sits on, because a real drummer doesn't have to have Frank Oz's head between his legs. But it's really so first of all, I couldn't stop thinking about Frank Oz's head during that, like where his body would be, but also it was just neat to sort of peek behind the curtain of how this band operates. But I also want to point out, it's not just that the puppetry is really great, it's that there's much more fluidity to the camera in this segment than there is in the previous Electric Mayhem sequences we've seen. And it's interesting to think about this as, we're still quite a few years before MTV, but we're in sort of the golden era of concert movies. So you can sort of picture them watching some of these really great concert documentaries of the early 70s and taking notes and thinking about how can we make the Electric Mayhem look like that. And I think it worked.
So this episode also has a Wayne and Wanda number.
And every Sunday afternoon,
She'd jump in his boat and they would spoon. And then he'd row, row, row.
And they sink.
Is this the longest that Wayne and Wanda get to sing yet?
I was thinking that, at least of the ones we've seen so far.
At least in this order, yeah.
Yeah, it's longer than they typically sing. I wondered about her jumping in his boat so that they can spoon. I know that Sam is keeping a close watch on Wayne and Wanda's songs being morally above reproach and different from the rest of the character of The Muppet Show. I don't know.
I think that Sam, much like many of today's Republicans, doesn't actually think about morality in terms of the content, but rather about, does it come from white people? Does it come from white people from the previous generation?
And is it at least 50 years old?
Right. Like this checks both of those boxes.
From the Ziegfeld Follies of 1912, with music by James V. Monaco, who's most famous for the song You Made Me Love You, I Didn't Want to Do It, and lyrics by William Jerome, who was a big lyricist in Tin Pan Alley vaudeville minstrel circuits. The song in the present day is most known as the theme of an Australian soccer team, the Richmond Tigers, but they've rewritten the lyrics to be, "Oh, we're from Tigerland."
Sure.
I actually watched a YouTube video of a couple of guys playing and singing on the accordion. It was very charming. But the song also has a previous Muppet history, as Ralph and Jimmy Dean did it twice. Twice, yeah. And it comes up in a future Muppet Show episode.
Did any of you know this song before hearing it on this episode?
Nope.
I had no memory of it. And I would argue that Wayne and Wanda does not work if the song goes on too long, because it was terrible. I was like, when is the boat going to sink? Like, because you know the joke. So it's like, obviously the boat's going to sink. Why is the boat not sinking?
Yeah, why does it take so long?
It shocked me because I've really spent the last year getting to know the songs of this era even better, and I still didn't know this song. Like,
it's kind of your whole thing.
And like, I know a lot of the Wayne and Wanda material, and this it just caught me off guard. But the fact that it has all these other places where the song shows up makes me wonder, why don't I know it? Probably because it's not a great song.
It's really bad.
Maybe you need to go to more Australian soccer games.
That's probably it.
Yeah. I am going to drop in the show notes. You mentioned the other hit song from this writer was You Made Me Love You, and there's a classic Cookie Monster bit done to that number. So it's a treat, and we'll show it.
So the next song is considerably more well-known. It's Can't Take My Eyes Off You is the official title of the song, which makes no sense because the line in the song is "Can't take my eyes off of you."
And also that's like, I don't think anyone thinks that's the title either.
Right. It's very strange. And it appears alternately both ways, depending on who recorded it and where and when and how. It was written by Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio for the Four Seasons. And it was a hit for them in 1967. It went to number 2. And it's also, curiously, number 5 on that same weird BMI most radio and TV played songs of the century list. The number 5 most played song of all time.
That's
very
less
strange.
surprising.
I think it makes sense that songs from this era would dominate that list because that was such a huge era for radio. And then they all had a second wind in the 80s with the advent of oldies stations. So
right. Yeah, no, the majority of the songs at the top of that list are all Sunshine AM oldies standbys. Like number 1 is You've Lost That Love and Feeling, and number 2 is Never My Love by the Association. So yeah, it's definitely an oldies dominated list.
Well, You've Lost That Love and Feeling got a boost from that episode of Cheers where Rebecca's paramour played it on a radio station that he owns all night just to keep her in the mood. I don't know why I remember that from my childhood. That should have gone over my head.
That's delightful. This one's also a soccer anthem, in this particular case, for the Welsh national soccer team. It's been covered a million times. It's been in a lot of movies. It was in 10 Things I Hate About You. That's kind of the most recent, biggest reference for my generation. And the setup for this particular number is very strange. It's Ruth Buzzi and Sweetums in a weird medieval setting. And I can't quite figure out what the story is here. I'm wondering if you all have ideas about this.
I don't, but I do. It's weird. This is not. I associate this song with this very weird ABC miniseries called Wild Palms that starred everybody actually, but Dana Delaney and BB Newirth stick out for me now. And I bought the soundtrack, and it's still in my iTunes, like as being on that album, and not any of the million other things it's on. But then watching this, I was like, oh, this must have been the first time I heard this song, was watching the Muppet Show, because I remembered it really clearly, like when I saw it. But it also really reminded me of one that I actually just remember without rewatching it, which is when they did A Little Help from My Friends with like cannibals, I want to say, or like a singing statue. I mean, we'll get to it eventually.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. That was on one of those VHS
sacrifice.
compilation tapes.
Yeah. But so like they definitely, like, this is a thing that they would do, right? They would take an oldie that was only 10 years old, or less in the case of this one, and like just do something weird with it that didn't necessarily make sense. Though this makes less sense than that one does. But I think this is kind of like a Muppet Show staple of just like, throw it in a whatever. We have a castle set. Stick it in a castle set.
At the beginning of this song, it plays a little bit into Ruth Buzzi's Gladys character, right? Because part of her thing, other than hitting people with her purse, she was always like the premature spinster who was looking for a date. So her throwing herself at Sweetums,
literally,
made sense to sort of like what people might expect from Ruth Buzzi. And then the turnaround where all of a sudden he's actually interested after, which seems totally unmotivated, right? Like after half a song of him seeming to be annoyed by her, suddenly being interested in her. That's the part where it sort of lost me.
Well, she does a little dance. Here's what I figured out about the story, which doesn't quite make sense anyway. But she's pining after him, literally throwing herself at him, and then at some point she does this little dance that wins him over, and he promptly yells, "I love you, baby." And after a minute or so of them doing a kind of love-hate dance fight, which is not the first of its kind for the Muppet Show, she breaks a chair over his head and raises her arms in victory. So the fact that he is now excited about her has totally flipped her, and now she's not into it anymore.
Something that I noticed when we were watching this is that during that dance break, Sweetums exits the frame of the camera, and when he comes back, it's a slightly different Sweetums puppet. So for the first half of this number, Richard Hunt is operating both arms of Sweetums, and Sweetums doesn't talk, so he doesn't need to operate the mouth at all. And then while Ruth is dancing, he goes and swaps into the Sweetums that only has a left arm that moves, and his right arm is sort of like tucked into his midsection, sort of like Napoleon, so that he can use his other hand to move Sweetum's mouth while he sings, which is a thing that prior to doing this podcast, they didn't realize was something they'd ever needed to worry about, but we'll see this happen a couple more times. We already recorded the Sandy Duncan episode, and that's the first time I noticed it, and now you can look forward to seeing it again when that happens there.
Let's play a clip, because as much as we have been not enjoying Ruth Buzzi, I found this number delightful, partly because I love the song, but also, and I think because I love Sweetums. Really, it could have been any guest star in this, and I would have enjoyed it.
Kind of woman.
Now that we've heard her belting in a place that definitely does suit her voice, I also want to note, and I later again we'll talk about how I'm frustrated that the writers didn't seem to know how to write for Ruth Buzzi. It doesn't seem like anybody found the right key for her, given how low she is for the verses of the song. She's a lot less audible. She's really at the bottom of her range, and I want somebody in that room to have stood up for Ruth Buzzi and be like, find a key that works for her, write material that's more fun for her.
Yeah, the whole thing feels like it was thrown together at the last minute because, like, they're in this vaguely medieval setting and she's wearing like a weird outfit, kind of like the horny virgins in the Castle Anthrax and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And none of it coheres in any way. And that's not to say that it has to cohere with the content of the song, but a lot of times these sort of like, we're going to set a song in a weird place thing, there's at least something funny about the disconnect. And here it just seems to be like, well, we had a costume.
Well, I think maybe it's because this is Sweetums' first appearance on the Muppet Show, and Sweetums is an ogre, and ogres live in castles, right? Like he comes from a medieval setting in his original appearance on The Frog Prince.
That makes sense.
Not that the Muppets have ever been particularly interested in keeping any Muppet in a setting that makes sense for them.
Right. I think also just comparing it to Joel Grey, like I just was like, oh, you did something. You didn't just have him stand in a cabaret and sing. But yeah, I mean, it's not good, but it's my favorite thing in the episode, which is a low bar, I guess.
Adam's petition for this episode is it's not good.
It's not great. It's a coincidence that we played that clip from the Rita Moreno episode up top, but because we did, I couldn't help but notice the repeat of That's My Kind of Woman from a monster to a human guest star. Odd.
Yeah, just made me miss Rita Moreno, frankly.
From the same monster, right?
No, it was Animal.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Bieber.
But in both that episode and this episode, we have Sweetums picking up a female guest star and carrying her away.
Yes, that is correct.
And also the line in both places is in response to the female guest star, like fighting back or attacking in some way.
Yeah, just before you conk out, that's my kind of woman.
Yes.
Yep.
Feminism, 70s style.
I mean, we'll see in the Candice Bergen episode, feminism equals punching men, which I'm okay with that.
Yes. When do we get to Linda Carter? Not for a while, right?
It's going to be a bit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Speaking of harm, let's talk about the UK spot.
I'll admit I split bananas, take Easter eggs and make them die. But I never harmed an onion, so why should they make me cry? Once I saw a salad dressing, my face got radish, my oh my. But I never harmed an onion, so why should they make me cry?
Gosh, the Muppets really love a novelty song with puns, don't they?
Is that a problem? I mean,
no, it just seems like they've managed to collect all of them, which is delightful. So this is a novelty song from 1955, originally recorded by Steve Allen, written by Lanny Gray, Ginger Gray, and Mo Jaffe. And it's another song that appears on Ralph's Old Brown Ears Is Back album. And I had a hard time finding any information about this song other than that Steve Allen recorded it.
And that it requires more notes on a piano than Ralph is actually using on his little 3.5 octave or whatever that instrument is that he's got there. I know at some point he will switch to a full-size piano with a little bust of Beethoven on and everything, but he does not seem to have that this season, and he is producing music that I don't think can be produced on the instrument that he is using.
Well, and at some point he was at that same piano and it wasn't a piano. Like the sound coming out of it was a harpsichord or something. And I mean, it's fine. They're puppets, but I did notice.
It's still going to
Guys,
me.
He's not really playing the piano.
What? How dare you?
Speaking of more real musicians.
Oh, nice segue.
Smooth.
Good blend.
Our last song of the episode is a performance by the Gogolala Jubilee Jug Band. Man, the Muppets also really loved a jug band.
Boy, did they.
This is a Roger Miller song, future Muppet Show guest Roger Miller, from 1965, and it will appear in a later episode.
Oh, no.
Not performed by this group, though.
I got up and left the couch when this came on. I couldn't.
I'm from Kentucky. I sort of am duty bound to defend the honor of Appalachian nonsense
and of Muppet Jug Bands.
Yes, definitely. And I will not fall on my sword for this particular Muppet Jug Band, as Emmett Otter is definitely the gold standard of those. But I did find this pretty cute. It's a group of 5 whatnots with about 3 teeth between them. And it's silly. And there's not a lot of substance to it.
It is with great pleasure that I present the Gogalala Jubilee Jug Band.
That does not sound culturally uplifting.
Well, you can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. You can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. No, you can't roller skate in a buffalo herd.
You can be happy if you're mine too.
Put your mind to it. Buckle down.
Do it.
You can't go swimming in a baseball.
I want to jump in just to say that the introduction of this clip, when Sam assumes that it's not cultural because it's a jug band. So first of all, that's, all sorts of classist and terrible. But I also wonder, Jim Henson comes from Mississippi, and I wonder how much of that little gag is a little peek into some of his own sort of personal hurt, or if that's a peek into Jim feeling like the things that he loves as someone who grew up in the country aren't good enough for the big city folks of television. So I don't know. It's like it's a throwaway line, but it hurts a little bit to think about it.
This makes my observation feel super weird, especially having grown up in Manhattan. But like, are these puppets like a little offensive? Like, far be it for me to defend Appalachia, but like, I don't like them. Like, there's like I don't know. There's such a weird stereotype to them, as you say, having 3 teeth between them.
And no eyes. I think some of them have glasses on top of their heads, but no actual eyes that you can see. I don't think any of them have eyes.
I mean, a lot of Muppets don't have eyes. Scooter doesn't have eyes.
It's, it seems like a double-edged sword, but I have to say, having grown up in Kentucky and grown up with grandparents who come from deep rural Kentucky, man, they love nothing more than country bumpkin humor.
Okay.
Like, Hee Haw was a huge hit because of people.
Right, that's true.
Like there's a certain, like, we're in on the jokeness to it that they appreciate.
And remember, Jack Burns, who's the head writer of The Muppet Show, was the head writer of Hee Haw as well.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. They're super not for me, and that's okay. They don't have to be. Although, speaking of that intro, totally unrelated to the actual content, they couldn't give Ruth a second take.
It is with great pleasure that I
like.
Yeah, and she has a moment where she's staring at the camera before. Is that where it doesn't seem like she knows that they're recording for a couple seconds?
I don't remember. I it's right at the beginning. Just start over. Like, you haven't lost anything. I found it very strange.
I'm telling you, shambolic. It's the word of the day.
Part of it is that this was one of the first episodes they made, and in the UK, the union culture around television production was really, really strict. Like, they went till 6 o'clock and then lights out. And so they might have been under time pressure. And especially if this was an early episode where they weren't quite used to getting everything done on that kind of a schedule, they may have really been under the gun.
Right. And it's not super important. And most people are not making a podcast and, watching it multiple times to make an audio clip. Like, I get it. It's going to blow by in syndication, but I don't know. Thought it was weird.
She does make this great face at Sam that you can't hear over audio, but I think that we've got a GIF of it that's going to be in the show notes.
Absolutely.
But when Sam says it's not culturally uplifting, Ruth shows him what she thinks of that.
Ready! 3, 2, 1, fire!
All right, we have arrived at our shot out of a cannon segment where we talk about the elements that became canonical on The Muppet Show. I have some things I'd like to get off my chest.
I can't wait.
I'm going to tell you about them in just a moment. First, I will tell you that we have an At the Dance segment. There's not much that you need to know. There's a doofy running gag. The blue frackle has 3 legs, and that is mined for Muppet body horror that isn't particularly entertaining. But the blue frackle is not what I came here to talk about. I came to reiterate my love for George, the motherfucking janitor.
I wish they'd had rock and roll in the 40s. Why? It'd be dead by now.
George saying what we're all thinking. We've got a Muppet news flash. This time it's the Atlantic Ocean that's been kidnapped. I think we've had New York City kidnapped in the past. Yeah, there are a lot of kidnappings. I had not much to say about that.
I noticed that the Muppet newscaster has eyes, which I did not remember him having. And so I looked it up, and it's because he will eventually get glasses, which is the Muppet newscaster that I prefer. His eyes look creepy to me. I don't know if anyone else noticed that.
Oh, yeah. He's got this weird squint at the moment, and possibly because he needs glasses. He hasn't found the right pair yet. Okay. Let's talk about the talk spot. And I know we've been giving all these caveats for Ruth Buzzi is actually funny. Don't judge her based on this episode. And as with that, I will tell you, I do enjoy The Muppet Show, or I wouldn't be here. However, I am really angry about this episode. And yes, it is a little unfair to show up in the year 2021 and talk about how much of our standards now should have been applied in 1976. Like, Kermit is hitting on just about every lady guest star in a way that feels really gross now, and it was kind of an expected, conventional thing then. However, now, a few episodes in, after we've had some beautiful lady guest stars, we are featuring a lady who is a very capable actress and singer and is not known for being beautiful. She's known for being funny. And it's like the writers saw her showing up and were totally dumbfounded by, like, what do we write for this woman? I don't know. What do women think about? And the answer that they came up with was the most damaging possible thing they could think of, and also the laziest writing that they could think of. And the answer that they landed on was, oh, fat phobia and diet culture. That's what women are thinking about, right? And I'm so mad about it. And it is not only in this talk spot, it kind of shows up throughout the episode in a way that even the backstage plot, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we will, but this is much more present. And it starts right at the top of the show, where Fozzie tells his first joke in the intro.
I finally found the sure way to lose weight. I bought a scale that lies.
And then they show the audience laughing because concentrating on weight loss all the time is funny. So we have it at the top of the show. It carries into this talk spot where Ruth Buzzi talks about how she literally hates fat. We talk about that. And then there's a panel spot later where she plays this exercise-obsessed character. And thanks, I hate it.
Well, Ruth, I thought we'd just sit here and chew the fat for a while.
Oh, Kermit, I never chew the fat.
Yeah, why?
No, fat is not good for you. Fat is a no-no. In fact, every time I see fat, I go black. You are looking at a body, Kermit, that has not 1 ounce of fat on it.
Well, yes.
This is lean. Lean. Lino, Kermit, my froggy friend.
Well, I can see all that, yeah.
Kermit, I had a friend who chewed so much fat that she was as big as a house, and she decided to rent herself out as a duplex.
What do you love?
Oh, well, I love to eat. I eat health foods, organic foods, dairy products.
Dairy products. No, that's a no-no. Dairy products killed my uncle.
Oh, well, that's awful.
Yep, he was hit by a dairy truck.
That's terrible.
His last words were, "Take the cheese off my chest."
Oh, that's awful, Kermit.
Yeah, well, don't blame me. I didn't write that.
Oh, it's a joke.
Yeah, it was just a joke. That's up to the laugh track.
Now, what you should know is when Kermit does that take the cheese off my chest thing, he's doing this cute little squashed down thing. And I am angry at the lazy writing in this episode over a few points. But the writers have decided to be so lazy here that when they have Kermit doing this adorable little pantomime being crushed by cheese, they couldn't be bothered to write a goddamn cheese pun. And there are infinite options that they have at their disposal. Kermit could have said, "This is making me blue," or "I'm wedged in a little too tightly here," or "I camembert this," or "It's so cruel to see a frog and run it over." I'm just saying.
Those are all very good jokes.
Thank you. I left that one open for you.
Thanks. It's interesting, and again, to be doing this podcast, right? Like, because my initial note was TalkSpot is weird, but it feels improvised, is what I wrote on my first watch. And I think that's mostly a testament actually to Jim's performance, because then when I watched it again, I was like, oh no, I don't think this is improvised at all. I think this is scripted, and it's scripted badly, right? Which is why I feel like there's just like weird pauses in it that feel awkward, which is, I think, what I was picking up on as improvised. Like, my first take on it was that it was like a very 70s sort of parody of diet culture more than anything. And then you just sort of casually mentioned in our Slack that you were mad about it. And then as I watched it again, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I see why she's mad about it, right? Like, you didn't even tell me why. And I was like, oh yeah, no, I get it. Let's play the panel. We have a clip of the panel. This is the first time this has happened since the Rita Moreno episode. They do this sort of talk show setup, which has both a very adult joke and of just a very 70s joke, but also is sort of on the same theme of why are we talking about how fit Ruth Buzzi is.
We're supposed to be talking about physical fitness.
Oh, physical fitness?
Yes, physical fitness.
Well, I'm fit.
Let's get physical.
I'm a nut on physical fitness.
Really?
In fact, I've tried every exercise program that there is. Right now, I'm into yoga.
Yoga?
Yes, yoga.
Isn't it that weird sour milk stuff?
Oh, no, that's yogurt.
Can you imagine anyone making that joke about yoga or yogurt now? I find that part very quaint.
I was shocked that they knew what yoga was in the 70s. I think of it as a much more recent phenomenon in America.
But I think in this point, like, Sam is speaking for the general audience of like, oh, it's weird. And even yogurt's a little weird, right? It's this weird thing that weird people do. But it is strange because Ruth is ostensibly playing a different character here, but she's still this like fitness obsessed person.
Yep.
I have exactly one redeeming thing to say about the panel, which is watching Sam be weirded out by Ruth Buzzi doing yoga is a lot of fun.
It is great. And
he gets into it.
Just that bizarre, whatever that character is who decides to hit on Piggy, very strange. And it's Richard Hunt as Piggy in this scene, presumably because Frank Oz is doing Sam, and they haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah. And Piggy immediately agreeing to get physical with this strange pig.
Yeah.
On camera. I'm confused by a lot of things about this panel in this episode.
I'm wondering if one of the reasons for the weirdness and the grossness of the episode is that Ruth Buzzi wasn't really a personality in the way a lot of Muppet Show guests are/were. Like, she's very much a character sketch comedian, and a lot of what they have her doing is like sort of sketch, but very, very loosely.
Yeah, I wonder why, and badly. There's a sketch where she's a prisoner and she's being interrogated, and it's just bad. And I wonder why they didn't have her do Gladys, like a Muppet version of Gladys. It feels like
they had this great idea for her being interrogated in an army situation. It wasn't a good idea. I think they knew.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like an old hacky joke. Like, I don't even think that that's original to this sketch. I think that's like goes back to at least, vaudeville in World War I.
Yeah. If they're saying we have ways of making you talk and the joke is then she won't stop talking, surely that's not the first time this joke has been made.
That's also the sort of thing that, on Laugh-In, that would have been a great 30-second sketch. But on the Muppet Show, where they don't really do those quick sketches, or at least they don't in this episode, and some of the other ones we've seen, briefer sketches, they could have just made the joke and been done, and it would have been fine.
I wonder if they originally intended to do something with Gladys and then for some rights reason couldn't.
Oh, maybe.
It's just weird because like none of these characters have her doing a voice or any unusual physicality. I've been trying to think of like a modern day equivalent, like somebody from SNL, like if they pulled on like Melissa Villaseñor and had her not do impressions.
Right. The DVD pop-ups actually chose the interrogation sketch to inform me, as if apologizing, that the show got a new head writer in season 2.
is the right time to tell you.
And they also pointed out that that's really when the relationships between the Muppets really started to form, though we will see some of that happening actually in this episode, and that the guest stars were kept mostly separate from the backstage in season 1, not exclusively, but mostly. And I was like, what an interesting time for you to decide to put a lot of text on the screen, Disney, because wow, this is boring, and you know it.
They were doing their best.
Yeah, so
Yeah. Speaking of relationships between the characters, we do have a Fozzie Bear sketch that kind of became the quintessential relationship between him and Statler and Waldorf.
Look, if you don't like me, why do you come here?
Oh, because you're one of the top comics in the business.
In the world.
In the business world.
Look, who's doing the show, you or me?
Well, we're getting all the laughs.
This is my act.
And you're the greatest straight man in the business. You've never been funnier.
Never.
Really? Oh, thank you. You're a wonderful audience. Kisses. Kisses. Yeah.
What did we just do?
His act.
No, we've never been funnier.
There you have it. One last canonical sketch before we get to the wrap-up. We've got the Talking Houses segment. And maybe I'm just salty about this entire episode, but I'm not going to actually tell you what joke the Talking Houses tell. I'm going to tell you they have a formula. They pretty much stick to it. Their formula is one house has a problem. Another house says, oh, this kind of problem. And the first house says, no, the name of a kind of a house. That's the joke. They do it. They get out. I love these half-assed jokes. And today I just don't have the patience for it. Instead, I'm going to tell a different joke. Hey, Christy. I think my brother, who's a house, is playing too much poker.
Oh, is he a gambler?
No, he's a house of cards. He thought I was going to say a casino because that's the kind of jokes that the Talking Houses tell, and somebody has to amuse me, and it is not this episode of The Muppet Show.
But, to our larger point, I love the Talking Houses, and this wasn't a good one.
Yeah, they will have better Talking Houses jokes.
Yes.
There will be a few more in the first season.
If you like At the Dance and Veterinarian's Hospital, you probably also like Talking Houses.
Yeah.
I find that Talking Houses are a little bit controversial in the Muppet fandom. Some people absolutely cannot stand them. But they're also such quick bits, like who cares?
Right. It's one joke.
Yeah, I usually love them. And today I'm very unforgiving, apparently.
And if you, listener, also love the Talking Houses, you should know that there's a newly created Twitter at Muppet Houses run by our friends at Tough Pigs that is doing new original Talking Houses style jokes every day.
I got to check that out.
We should talk about the backstage plot.
Oh, yeah. That was a thing that happened.
Yeah. Okay. It's not great. Surprise. But Scooter, for reasons wildly unclear, brings a mechanical wind-up TV show host into the theater in a crate, which is slightly malevolent. And proceeds to lock Kermit into the crate, though he then immediately gets out of it somehow, and hit on Piggy, and it's very strange.
Yeah, look. Let me take you away from all this. A marriage made in heaven, a frog and a pig. We could have bouncing baby figs.
So bouncing baby figs is definitely a thing that is going to come up again and again and is lodged deep in my childhood memory. But I will say, like, a positive thing, all that the robot is Kermit with a key in its back. And the puppetry on it is remarkable because it really is a different thing, like the way that it moves. And I kind of love it, even though I don't really love the storyline. This is also, the DVD says that this is the first Piggy karate chop. I would argue that it's not a karate chop, but she does really beat the crap out of him.
And she does give her hiya.
It's true, she does. And I made a gif of it, and like, it's Kermit's little face. Like, I don't even know if it's on purpose or if they just got lucky, but like, he just makes this like, what is happening? Why me expression? And it's amazing. Like, there's some really nice stuff in this episode that the Muppets are doing, even if it is not our favorite, writing or guest star episode. And I do want to shout that out. This also answers a question that we had in the Connie Stevens episode about what is happening backstage versus on stage and where and when. And I have always sort of thought of the Muppet Show as kind of like 30 Rock, where like we're watching a TV show about the making of the Muppet Show, the vaudeville show. But this Kermit is a TV host right? They specifically say a mechanical TV host. And in the talk spot, he references the laugh track, which sort of suggests that they know that they are making a TV show, which means that everything backstage is also part of that TV show, which is a little bit of a meta thing that somehow after 40 years of watching The Muppet Show has just broken me slightly.
Well, especially because you never see cameras, which, if it's a 30 Rock style show about a show, then you would expect that at some point we would see television cameras somewhere in this theater, either, pointing at the stage or being moved around backstage. But I mean, I think it's just sloppy writing.
Possibly.
And the robot Kermit does go on stage at the end and thank their very special guest star, Booth Ruzzi.
Oh, we should talk about the mirror gag too, because for all that that wind up Kermit moves differently, they have this really lovely moment where they do again a very old vaudeville bit, and Michal found this great article detailing the history of this bit that goes back to the late 19th century of performers mirroring each other's moves, and then one of them sort of punking the other one.
Yeah, I think about it as a bit from the Marx Brothers movie Duck Soup, and I think about it as an I Love Lucy bit where Lucy and Harpo do this mirror gag. Muppets Most Wanted has mostly slipped out of my brain. I apologize to everyone. I'll have to go back and revisit it. But apparently they do a mirror gag between Kermit and Constantine as well.
It's also interesting that they clearly recorded Jim Henson, or maybe he just did both voices. Like, they don't talk at the same time. He might have just been doing both voices live, but like somehow they can't handle Frank Oz doing two characters at once, but they were able to have two Kermits in the same place. So they will solve that eventually. But for now, we have two piggies in the same episode still.
Wonderful! Marvelous! The Jew should care for me. Huh?
Any other awards or final thoughts?
I mean, I don't have a most of its time award for any particular bit of this episode. Just kind of everything.
This whole fucking episode is of its time.
It's very of its time. Happy 1976, everybody.
Well, did you like the show?
No, I didn't.
Perfect.
Well, we made it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Muppeturgy. Join us next week for our discussion of the Jim Neighbors episode. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Muppeturgy, or on the web at Muppeturgy.com. If you like what we're doing, please tell your friends, tell your family, and tell strangers on the internet by leaving a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music was composed and performed by Christy Bauer. Our show logo was created by Todd Brian Backus. And this episode was edited by me, David Levy.
Oh my God, I just had a complete brain blip. Accordion is the word I was trying to think of.